to episode 8 of season 5 of Performing the Arts. My name, as always, is Brian M. Davis. Today, joining me is Daniel Farrands. He is a filmmaker, documentarian, screenwriter, producer, a lot of stuff. If you are a fan of horror, you know the name because he has written films like Halloween 6, worked on 2 Amityville projects, one that had just came out more than a few years ago. He's also been doing his own work as a filmmaker. And if you always wondered who the 2 posters in the background, he's also done more than a handful of documentaries on horror-related stuff. Never Sleep Again and His Name is Station. And so, yeah, I'm definitely talking to him today for this great episode. So, Daniel, how did you get into film?
Hey, Brian, how you doing? Thanks for having me on. First of all, I appreciate it. Well, how did I get into it? I think just by pure drive and maybe a little insanity. So, no, I think I just grew up. I think a lot of, you hear a lot of filmmakers, bigger people than me talk about how, they made their home movies when they were kids. And I grew up in the age of whether we still had Super 8 film, and graduated to VHS after that. But so I'm dating myself there. Yeah, I think it was just always a passion for me. I was always like directing little plays at school and directing kids in the neighborhood, making little short films, and horror became kind of my obsession when I was about 12, 13 years old. It's a funny story. I had a babysitter and I dragged her kicking and screaming to take us to see Friday the 13th Part 2, which traumatized me so much that I think I spent the entire summer with the lights on and not walking past dark doorways. But it's funny, that was the year in 1981 where, horror kind of went balls out, it sort of really launched the year, I guess, the generation of the sequel, from the Fridays and the Halloweens, and then shortly after Elm Street came out. So, I really was kind of weaned on a diet of those movies. And so it really started actually when I was 14. I, had felt apparently I had, graduated enough that I should be in the big leagues. So I wrote a letter to Frank Mancuso Jr., who was the producer of the Friday the 13th films. And lo and behold, he wrote me back, which I never expected would happen. And just wrote this incredibly just generous and encouraging letter. And he was, apparently shocked that a 14-year-old wrote whatever I wrote to him. I wrote it well enough that it got his attention. And actually, he said it was the first time he ever responded to a query about the series. So, so I kind of felt like there was a bit of I don't know, like I was, kind of invited in by him. And even though I knew no one, and I was, growing up in a small Northern California town, I kind of threw caution to the wind when I was barely 18, and I moved to Los Angeles and started, knocking on doors and showing scripts around, and continued to write, worked day jobs, did the usual thing that people do when they're starting. So that was the beginning of it.
Now, since you mentioned 1981 and the early 80s, the early 80s slasher genre, especially going to like say 1985 or so, it was in a state of I don't want to say like before Freddy became like the more popular figurehead. It was always like oh, it's Friday the 13th. Like it's weird because like it's like a lot of the stuff that came out was more geared towards Jason Voorhees, mass killers, that sort of thing too. And a lot of it had to do with parents being very, upset. As like, oh, take for instance, Silent Night, Deadly Night, a famous horror film where they portrayed a Santa being a rapist and killer. And it wasn't like Santa Claus. It was someone dressed as Santa Claus, mind you. And then you have someone who a character's mental capacity being shattered over one Christmas night, and using the idea of having to be Santa Claus and then going around essentially murdering people. And there was another movie, Christmas Evil, that I believe was maybe in the early 80s or maybe in a couple of years before, that had the same problem where it's like, oh, you can't portray, it's a horror film that's portraying uh, Santa Claus as being, oh, kind of like a bad figure. When you were growing up around this time, did you have the same problems like, hey, I'm gonna go see a horror film, and lo and behold, there'll be like maybe a couple of people maybe protesting this idea of you going to a horror film, or was it just pretty open minded? It's like, oh, okay, you want to go see a horror film, go see a horror film. We're not gonna stop you from going to see the movie.
Are you talking about kind of society in general, or are you talking about my own home, my own upbringing?
Yeah, well, not upbringing, but at least stuff you probably saw in general. Because I know.
Well, I mean, this whole tradition of like holidays turned into, kind of for marketing reasons, like using holidays to kind of launch horror films really began with Halloween.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question about it. They turned this innocent childhood holiday on its head and created the ultimate boogeyman, Michael Myers. So, everybody wanted to jump on that bandwagon in terms of, the low budget, high return horror film. And that just became, a genre unto itself. The slasher genre of the 80s was really born from Halloween's success. And, Friday the 13th was a result of that as well. And then there were all kinds of just imitators on and on and on. Like you mentioned, there was New Year's Evil. There was, name 100 of them, and there just goes, the list is endless. From Terror Train to Silent Night, Deadly Night films. And, but that being said, I mean, I remember there being, talk shows where these kind of like women with helmet hair would get on and protest and go on to Phil Donahue and talk about how these were, morally repugnant and they were ruining our society and children's minds were being warped. I don't know. I mean, there's always backlash when something hits that makes people uncomfortable or challenges them, or but I just I think for kids my age, for teenagers, these movies were fun. They were like rites of passage and we had fun with them. They were the quintessential date movie. It was like akin to riding a roller coaster. We didn't want to become serial killers because we watched them.
Now, as a fan growing up, did you knew about the struggles that horror films would have go through with the MPAA and stuff like that too? Or did you figure, oh, what they shot on film is what they had already shipped out to whatever? Or did you know about like the struggles that, this film is got to be rated X, or they're trying to turn it to at least a rated R thing?
I mean, I think everybody was kind of aware of it. The irony being is that my very first, kind of day job when I arrived in Los Angeles was working for the MPAA. so I, got a firsthand look at that. And then what was fun about that job was that, I mean, I wasn't part of the ratings board per se, but I worked in the office. And whenever they would have a horror film, like even one of the Friday the 13th sequels, I remember like part 7, part 8, I was working at the MPAA at that time, the late 80s, and they would just invite me to the screening room to watch, the original cut that they were about to, eviscerate with their comments. So a lot of that stuff I actually did get to see, like in private. So that was kind of an education to itself. But as a, like younger, growing up in a small town and all that, I mean, I think I was aware of the censor board as they became known. Only to the extent that I was a fan of Fangoria magazine, and there would be articles about things like that. So I was, I was kind of aware of it because of that. And I do remember when Texas Chainsaw 2 came out, it came out as an unrated film. And, I remember there were like, ushers standing in front of the entrance. So you couldn't get in unless you were, 18 or something. So, or it was X-rated. I want to say it was unrated. But anyway, so I was aware of it to that extent, but it wasn't until later that when I actually worked for that fascist organization, who actually made up of very nice people, and I think they've become a lot more lenient over the years compared to what they were back in those days. I mean, they couldn't show anything. Now it's kind of pretty, pretty liberal in terms of what they're, allowing filmmakers to show. So anyway.
It's weird because when you mentioned the MPAA, I was just thinking of my brother and I just saw Spiral over the weekend, and Darren Lynn Bousman said, "Oh, there was like a trap in there that was like too gruesome for the MPAA to do." And I'm watching the film, I'm like, there's like the one of the I'm not trying to give away some of the spoilers, but Lionsgate already released the first clip, which was essentially the first couple of minutes of the film, and the first trap has to do with a person's tongue being, compressed into
a. Yeah, I saw the movie last night, actually.
Oh, okay. So you know what I'm talking about. So and I'm watching this. I'm like, they haven't really messed. It's like, and I'm watching through the film. I'm like, there's a lot of stuff that's in here that could easily be trimmed down and stuff like that, and still be like considered to be a hard R because. And I'm watching, and then I'm kind of like remembering the stuff about the MPAA about how 30 years ago they'd be very strict about all that stuff, and then it's weird how nowadays the MPAA is like it's still a problem-ish thing where it's just like if you're doing a horror movie or something that's like very lenient towards violence, they may be very okay with some of the things was like Tarantino has gotten away with a lot of stuff in some of his recent films that would be like very like almost X-rated, but then you'd be watching a movie where it's like where it can be very PG-13 aside from maybe a brief nudity scene where it's just like, oh, it's a brief nudity scene, everything else is practically PG-13, there's hardly any cursing or anything, they'll just slap it with an R rating because it has that one scene of nudity where it's just like it doesn't make any sense outside of that nudity scene in general. But yeah, it's
I think that's American culture, I mean, they're offended by nude bodies, but it's okay if you shoot somebody 20 times in the head. So that gets into a whole other political debate that I don't want to touch on. But no, I think that's, things with the MPA, I think they've become a little bit more lenient in their views. I think violence has so permeated this country that, I feel like maybe I haven't worked with them for many years, obviously, so I don't know what the current, kind of thresholds are for these things. But, I think violence has just become so permissive and so pervasive that I think that the MPA maybe on some level kind of threw up their hands and said, okay, well, if this is what people want, we're going to just step aside. Yeah. So, I mean, and I think that's the struggle always between art and commerce and art and censorship, things like that. Those questions have lived on for long before the 80s. Those things were going on from the beginning of the motion picture industry. And I think the MPAA was
with stuff like that
created
too,
to sort of stop the government from censoring material. And so they kind of created this governing board to kind of control it themselves. And that's kind of was the birth of the MPAA. And they do a lot of other things, from anti-piracy efforts to legal cases to they're very active in Washington, D.C. So there's a lot of lobbying that goes on with them. But yeah, it's just, I think it's always a sign of the times, in terms of how permissive they become.
Yeah, it's weird because when you talk about the MPA, you can be like, it's like a double-edged sword, where it's like you talk about the good stuff, but also you have to talk about the bad stuff too, where it's just like you just can't really talk about the MPAA without saying, oh, well, aside from this one film, blah blah blah, and or sometime from another film, stuff like that too. So you, especially if you're a horror fan, about like the struggles a horror film has to go through with the MPAA, especially if it's like a classic horror film, like you just mentioned, Friday the 13th, Part 7 and Part 8. Well, yeah, Part 7, and Part 7 was notoriously famous for almost having an X rating and stuff like that too, because some of the kills were like very, very graphic and long and stuff like that too.
Again, for the time, like today, the stuff that was in the uncut, pre-MPAA interfered with, you know, version of part 7, but none of that nobody wouldn't even bat an eye at that today. It's just almost
And
juvenile the way that that it appears on screen. Like it's stuff like that you could see on an episode of,
Game of Thrones.
whatever, the FBI, or, just it's network TV has pushed the envelope so far, that, the stuff that you see in the early Friday the 13th movies or the 80s Friday the 13th movies is just, it's laughable by comparison,
Oh,
not
yeah.
to dismiss those movies. I love those movies, but, I think that the gore and the way that the MPAA sort of reacted to, I'll just call it middle America, having an issue with these films, they, today they wouldn't even bat an eye at half of what was submitted. It just would have gone right through. Like that sleeping bag kill, Jason could have slammed that guy against or that girl against the tree 100 times and they wouldn't care. They would have gone through.
Yeah.
But in those days they were, again, like I think, MPA is a political organization and they react to the political climate of the country. And I think that's part of what they do as a kind of a governing board for the movie industry, and I think I can tell you just from my own, knowing them, I mean, they're all parents of children, that was one of the qualifications to be on that board, be a parent at the time. I don't know if it's the same now. There was just criteria, if a movie had too many, fuck yous in it, R, if it's full frontal nudity, R, depending on the extent of the sexual content, X, so, all of that stuff was almost like they had a formula that they based their criteria. So anyway, but the things have certainly changed and I think they've lightened up quite a bit. I think the things that I'm seeing in movies like Hostel and, since, the kind of the torture porn days have come upon us and luckily faded, I just have seen like a real sea change in the way that the board analyzes and approves or disapproves movies. So I don't know what to say. Spiral I did see, and I think there was gore in it. I found it actually could be like Saw light. Like it didn't really feel to me like, other than the comparisons, obviously the references to Jigsaw and things like that, but I just didn't think of it, just didn't really play to me like a traditional Saw movie. It was almost like a police procedural with, this kind of copycat, Jigsaw. But they didn't really emphasize like the original film series.
One of my friends,
the traps, they weren't, I didn't find them to be as honestly creative as the original series. I think the thing with the hypodermic needles and falling into that pit, that's one I always remember.
Yeah, one of my friends actually had a great analogy for a Spiral, and I forgot what they said exactly, but they basically said they basically amounted to Spiral is almost like the U.S. Marshals of Saw, where it's like it's in the same universe, but it's a different type of movie. Whereas like, U.S. Marshals is following after the fugitive, but instead of the fugitive being more of a slick chase movie, U.S. Marshals is more along the lines of a by the books procedure, like
chase. No, definitely. I mean, I think anybody going in to see Spiral and expecting it to be like a thrilling horror film, I think they're going to be disappointed because it's not really what it was. I think it's got pieces of that, but it doesn't, for me, tonally, it was a little off. I didn't quite get what they were going for. It's like, are you telling a police procedural? Is this about, obviously it's dealing with like police corruption and things like that are so topical. But I don't know. I just felt like tonally it was a little confusing. Like what were they trying to tell us? Like, was it a thriller? Was it a horror film? Was it, I felt like I couldn't decide what it wanted to be.
Now, and this is a good question as a screenwriter. And I've tried to do screenwriting myself, but it's a little hard to do because it's a process. As a screenwriter, you mentioned, internally, films that, there are, and, watching, thinking back on Spiral, and this is nothing against the writers themselves, but it does have like a tone problem where it does have like, it doesn't know if it's something like a copycat, where it's like it's about a copycat, a copycat serial killer, that sort of thing. What's a police procedure? So as a screenwriter, how do you fit, how do you make sure to keep that tone of what type of genre you're doing? If you're doing a slasher film, you have to make sure it's it's like slasher format, that sort of thing too. If you're doing a documentary, how do you keep everything in tone? Is like, uh, do you follow a set of rules for each movie, or is it just basically something similar to making sure I have to have this right tone, or not tone in general, but just like make sure it's the right genre? There we
Well, I mean, you know, it's a lot of it's instinctive. I think, as somebody who's grown up on the genre, kind of anybody watches these movies, you see there's sort of a formula to them. I think the challenge comes is when you're combining things, like that movie. It's a good example of like, they really spent a lot of time with Chris Rock and his comrades and the police force. And, it was this sort of copycat jigsaw targeting, kind of corrupt police men, women. And, but I felt like, I think that's the struggle is with genre. You have to, kind of decide, is it this or is it that? You just make a decision, and hopefully, you follow through on it, and you deliver on the promise to the audience that that's the kind of movie they're going to go see. So I think some of it's just instinctive, like I said, but a lot of it too is just, trying to stay true to some of the paradigms that have existed for a long time. I think Halloween, Friday the 13th, those movies, have a formula. And when they divert necessarily from the formula, like the Jason X, which I know has its fans, but that
go.
certainly didn't play like your traditional Friday the 13th. Halloween 3 broke the rules when they did 3, which has been the controversial one all these years. So yeah, I think you have to sort of think about what the audience's expectations are, and you either going to make that movie or you're going to do something different, like a Jason Goes to Hell, where you really take the formula and you blow it up literally at the beginning of the
Uh,
movie.
Speaking of, well, I don't want to go into Halloween yet, because I do have a question about uh, screenwriting again, because from your, at least from what I could gather, your first IMDb credit, or at least your first credit as a screenwriter, was a movie called Rave, uh, from a
That
different,
Rave.
yeah,
Yeah, it was just called. It was really
it was
just
just
called
called
Rave.
Rave.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
was trying to remember because they have like this other title along with it, like some
It
subtitle
was like a stupid tagline that somehow people thought was
that,
the title, but it wasn't.
but movie called Rave, and
Yeah.
I was like, this is like, wait a minute, it's like, I was reading a plot. I was reading the plot too. I was like, this is a movie about rave culture and stuff like that. And I watched the trailer. I'm like, this is, and it has a very Romeo Juliet thing too, where it's like
Mhm.
there's, and I mean, at least because I'm a theater, because I have a theater background, that sort of thing. So I could just imagine. Sometimes I'd be like, oh, it's like I could just see like some type of things where it's like things falling into place. It's like, oh, there's that Romeo and Juliet thing where someone's part of another culture, this person's part of another culture, they love each other, but that sort of thing.
Mhm.
How did that project come into place for you?
Um, Going back to the MPAA, I worked with a woman who was friends with a producer named Luigi Singolani, who had produced a lot of independent movies at that time. She just was a personal friend of his. He had dinner with her one night and said, "Hey, I'm doing this movie called, we're going to call it Rave, and it's about this." It was a brand new thing at the time. It was very early '90s, and he's like, "I'm looking for a writer," and she's like, "Oh, you should meet this guy Dan, who works at the office, and he's a great writer and smart guy, young. He'd be good for you. You should at least meet him." And that's how that happened. It was literally, I walked into the meeting and I met him and the director, who was a guy named Shabadoo, who sadly passed this past year, really young. It's in the break-in movies from the '80s. He was kind of one of the first kind of hip hop, street dancers, break dancers. Um, and this was his idea. And he had kind of partnered with Luigi as a producer, and they needed somebody to write a script in pretty short order. and they hired me to do it. That was how that happened. And they had read, Luigi had read a couple things, samples of mine, and thought I was good, and I got along with him. And a lot of times, winning a job in the entertainment business is just, are you likable? Do you seem intelligent? Are you somebody that people want to work with? So that was how that happened.
Now, did you know a lot of stuff about rave culture, or was it?
No, nobody did. They were brand new.
Okay.
I mean, I have to, Shabadu's idea. He came to me with it and said, he had written like a little outline. I got maybe a 4 or 5 page treatment, and I basically was tasked with like, go write a script, and I did, and they made the movie. So to me, it was a thrill. I was like 22 years old, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and I got to be on the set. I got to see how it was all done. It was just, there was like a thrill to see actors saying words that you wrote. I think that there was like that excitement,
like written down and stuff like that.
Yeah. So maybe in a way it was like good preparation for me, because Halloween 6 came not long after that. So.
And speaking of Halloween 6, I wanted to ask, like, how did you get from writing a movie about the rave culture, or just about rave in general, to essentially Halloween 6? Because it's like, I'm like, that's an amazing feat to go from working with someone like Shabba-Do and dancing cultural and stuff like that, to essentially working with another icon, Michael Myers. And
well, I didn't work with him, but
working with him.
He's actually not real. Hate to tell you.
No, but working with the character, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, how is it the same thing where it's like they like you knew somebody, or they knew you?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't know anybody. Hardly. No, like I said, I grew up in a small town, and I loved horror films as a kid. I made them. When I saw Halloween and I saw the original Halloween when it aired for the first time on network television in 1981. And it was the week before Halloween 2 opened theatrically, and I think I was 12 years old. So it was after seeing Halloween 2 that I became this. It just lit a fire in me in a way that it's hard to really explain, and I'm sure a lot of fellow Halloween nights out there will relate. Everything was Halloween to me, and I was making my own Halloween movies in junior high school, everything from Halloween Party to The Hospital of Horrors to all kinds of like crazy little short films that I recruited kids to star in. Anyway, but it was actually after, I've told this story 100 times, after I had seen Halloween 5 in the theater the day it opened. And I remember declaring to the 2 friends that I saw the film with that I'm going to write Halloween 6. I didn't know how I was going to do that. I didn't know Mustafa Akkad, the executive producer. I didn't know anyway. I wasn't friends with John Carpenter. So I didn't know how to do that. So what I remember, what I did was I back in those days, pre-internet, there was at any kind of like local newsstand in most of LA, maybe there's in other cities too, but in LA, you could go to a newsstand and buy this thing called the Hollywood Creative Directory. And in it, they listed like addresses and executive names for all the production companies in town. Well, it didn't take much to learn that Trancas International Films and Galaxy International at the time were the companies behind these recent Halloween sequels. And I got the address. It was on Sunset Boulevard. I wrote a letter to Ramsey Thomas, who was the producer of. I wrote a very nice letter, like kind of like the one I wrote to Frank Mancuso when I was a young teenager. And lo and behold, Ramsey called me and said, "Hey, we are looking to do 6 right away, and send me something that you'd like me to read." Well, so I bundled up a script. It wasn't rave. It was a horror script that I had written, not Halloween, just an original piece that I'd written. I sent it off to him, and I wait, like every submission, you hear that. You never hear anything. But he called me about, I don't know, a couple weeks later and said, "Hey, I really like your style. I think this is really good. I think you're right. I like your passion for it. I really appreciated your letter. So come in. I want you to meet Mustafa Akkad. So I,
Wow.
nearly dropped the phone and couldn't believe that this was actually happening. But so I spent the next couple of weeks, digging into all kinds of stuff and going to like new age bookstores and finding I just wanted to find out what that mark was that they had put on Michael's wrist in 5.
Yeah.
It was like that symbol. And so I'll never forget, I went to the Bodhi Tree bookstore in LA, and which doesn't exist anymore, but it's this big new age bookstore, and I had drawn this thing that if I'd seen in this movie, and I remember the woman said, I think that's a rune, and here's a book. And she handed me a book called Rune Magic by Donald Tyson. I still have it, and in it talked about the thorn and what it was, and it was like when it was applied upon a person, it would literally visit them with evil. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. So I took that and I took all, and then I just started compiling all this research and everything Halloween, everything that before, all my ideas for 6, all my ideas for what should happen next, who all the characters were. I drew a family tree. I had a cover made that had Halloween 666, and I'd replaced the A with the thorn. So I had this whole presentation worked out. Now they call them pitch decks. Back then there was no name for that.
Okay.
So, I walked into the meeting with Ramsey by my side, and I walked into this big office just like you'd imagine, and there's Mustafa Akkad with his big pipe and the Halloween posters all hung on the wall behind him, and I was, I was 19 at the time, I think, when I first met him. So, it was crazy. So, and I met him I think it was if the meeting lasted 10 minutes, it was probably actually 5 minutes. He asked me a couple questions. I handed him my Bible, I'll call it, and I walked out. And I was like, that's the end of that. And then long story in between, but 5 years later, my phone rang again, and it was him. And he's like, you need to come in because nobody can figure this out. And we think maybe you can. Nobody, we've had a bunch of scripts and a bunch of writers and nobody's getting it, but we always remembered you, so come in. And I went and I had a meeting with Mr. Akkad and his son Malik, who's my age, and a producer named Paul Freeman, who had worked on 4. And I think after that meeting, they just sort of said, I think he gets it. And I think the one thing that I said at that meeting that Mustafa responded to was, it's Rosemary's Baby meets Halloween. And his eyes lit up when I said that. So it was kind of like when John Carpenter apparently pitched Halloween to him, the original movie, he's pitched to the same man, his idea. It's the Boogeyman murders babysitters. And that was the pitch. And I think Mustafa got excited by simple, straightforward, relatable ideas. And so I think when I said that, it was like, okay, I get where you're going with it. And so often write us a treatment. I wrote the treatment in, I don't know, a few days. And it was huge. I mean, it was like 30, 40 page long thing that, I was trying to, so young, and I was so anxious to be a part of this that I think I just, threw everything but the kitchen sink in. And
I imagine going forward.
He called me right away and said, listen, this is great, but you've got enough material here for 2 movies.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I thought you cut out for a second.
No, it's okay.
No. I just, I'd had these 2 giant, this voluminous giant, kind of epic treatment that I had written for Halloween 6. But he said, what I think is great is that you've given us enough for 2 movies. So the first half of this is Halloween 6. The second half is going to be Halloween 7. So that was where it began. And then they were really kind of desperate at the time because they'd had so many other writers try to crack it and didn't, at least to his satisfaction. So, and Miramax was involved at that point, and it was like this whole big thing of they had to start production on this movie by October, and it was June when I met them of '94. So I had not much time to write. I think I wrote the first draft in maybe 3 weeks, and then you know, a series of rewrites, but it was based on that script that they started cast, you know, putting all the pieces to produce the movie in Salt Lake City. And all of a sudden it was like a train that I was on, and it was running, it was rolling. So it was really thrilling. When I say I was grateful to be there, that doesn't even begin to cover it. It was one of
Yeah.
the most thrilling things that's ever happened to me.
What strikes me as with Halloween 6 is it's weird because when you look at it as a horror fan, it comes out at a time that is prior to Scream, but it's also coming out after Wes Craven's New Nightmare. So it's like and if you watch the film, it does have the very almost self-awareness thing that you would see in a Scream movie later, where it's like they're not like doing the whole catching other tropes or staying rules, but it's like it has that very sleek nature that you will find in a Scream movie later in
Well,
the
you know, it was the 90s, and I think people were becoming self-aware, you know, and I think cultural touchstones were being talked about more. You know, the internet was just beginning. I remember when we did Halloween 6, there was no AOL yet, but there were things like Prodigy and CompuServe, and it was just at that point where you could kind of start communicating with the world at large. There weren't what we kind of call websites now, but there were online kind of chat forums and things like that. So,
yeah,
but you know, I think maybe I was aware enough of that. I think certainly I took the notion of Michael Myers of being kind of like a cult figure, no pun intended, to a different level where people in the town were talking about him by name. You know, there was the radio show where he was a topic of the conversation. You know, I put him, and they were comparing him to Dahmer and Bundy and you know, it was kind of placing him in the quote unquote real world, because I think the previous movies hadn't really done that. You know, nobody had ever really talked about how he killed the economy of this town, and everybody was afraid to celebrate how, you know, so he was this larger than life figure to the people of Haddonfield and the people of Illinois, really, and maybe even the country, because people were having these national conversations. You know, there was suddenly 24-hour news and things. So I thought, I don't know, maybe it wasn't like a conscious thing, but I think, yeah, I think there was a self-awareness to Halloween 6.
but yeah, like I said, it's weird because when you watch the film, there is like a self-awareness thing, and it is almost very modern to the point where modern in the mid 90s type of thing, where you know there's a scene where Tommy Doyle is on the computer and he's showing Kara. This is what happens because I watched Triple Girl, and they always pronounce they pronounce it as both Kara and Kara at the same time.
Yeah, it's Kara Strune.
Yeah, so anyway, Tommy's showing Kara like the computer and all that stuff, and it's funny because you know somehow Tommy Doyle has able to find a site about the cult, like a code of Thor, that sort of thing, and if you look at the website, it's like it looks pretty like basic, like very 90s type of thing, where it's like it's like it has a very 90s aesthetic of a website. And
well, it wasn't a website. It was something he created. It was his own, like, CD. It was, you know, at the time we had these things called CD-ROMs, and that's what he was working off of. This kind of it was like his own research he had kind of compiled and put together. It's not a website. It's CD-ROM of Tommy's research.
Of Tommy and characters and Kara and the other Strodes and stuff like that too. One. How did you, in terms of writing the characters, did you have this notion, okay, Tommy Doyle, if he grew up and still living in Haddonfield, like how much fucked up of a life would he have still had? Because, you know, when he was a kid, he witnessed and encountered the boogeyman. He probably seen a couple of, you know, he's seen the people, he's seen a guy literally, you know, being shot off a roof and probably run off on the street, still, you know, whatnot. So like when you were writing Tommy Doyle, it's like how much like did you still figure him to be still traumatic, or were you working on the notion of, okay, yes, yes, he has trauma, but he's just like he's trying to still work past that trauma, because there are other how the later Halloween films do have that notion of characters that are still traumatic. They still have the trauma with them, but they are still working past that trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I conceived of him as this kind of loner who didn't have too many friends, kind of like he was as a kid. He was this lonely kid who, was kind of bullied and, you know, uh, sort of an outcast. I think we got that impression from the first film, and a nice little kid. But yeah, I think it was the trauma that he had witnessed as a child, and having had the boogeyman come face to face, and having had him invade his own home and try to murder his babysitter. And so
Yeah.
I think all of those things are true. Yeah, I think and that was the conceit of the character, that he was kind of a damaged goods kind of guy who's living sort of in this place of kind of solitude, and living in this little rented room in this boarding house across the street. And I just kind of wanted to play with the mythology of that neighborhood, and kind of what happened that night that Michael murdered his sister in 1963. And there's that whole beginning of the first shot of the original movie is that POV coming directly across the street toward the
Yeah.
Myers house. And that's where I sort of played with the notion of, oh, what if he was visiting the old lady across the street, and she had something to do with this coven, and she inducted him into this. So that was the beginning of it all. And again, the touch point was Rosemary's Baby, where you find out through the story that all of the people that are seemingly nice neighbors are actually Satanists. So that was kind of the beginning of it all. And but Tommy was to represent that. And also because, obviously Donald Pleasance was really getting up there in years.
Yeah.
We needed kind of, and we talked about this, a character that we always said this, to pass the torch, so we needed that other kind of Van Helsing, kind of a slightly obsessed guy or girl. Maybe today it would be, well, Laurie has become that in a way, new movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was always the idea, is that the Tommy Doyle character would kind of take on the mantle from Donald Pleasance, who was just so wonderful and incredible to have as part of our film.
I do have to ask about Donald Pleasance, and you mentioned he was getting up in age, and in the last movie before 6, they show that Dr. Loomis is beating the shit out of Michael Myers with a 2x4, and then as he's like laying on the final hits, he has like a apparent heart attack, or in a Halloween canon lore, he has like essentially a stroke. When you were working with the idea of writing Dr. Loomis, did you have this idea of, okay, I'm going to have Dr. Loomis in the background, or at least in the foreground, but still play an important character? The same, this.
Well,
yeah, so essentially, is.
No, I mean, when I found out that Donald, because who wouldn't want to jump at the chance of writing that role for him. And so I think, to me, the most daunting part of my job was when I got to the scenes with Loomis, like, how do I write this dialogue? I mean, what John Carpenter wrote in the original movie, and even in 2, was fantastic, and I think that it became almost like Syrian character in his hands, and I just didn't think that I was qualified to do it. So I remember struggling a lot and not feeling worthy of this, and I was very nervous about the fact that the script was going to go to him. But those fears were quickly, allayed when his agent, who's this little lady in London who had represented him for years, this lady, and called the producers and said that she read the script, but she slept with the lights on because it scared her so much. It was just a thrill. He picked up the phone, called me, and said, this is the best of the series that I, since the original, this is the best script I've read. So thank you for writing this, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it, and can't wait to get going.
Like I said, I feel like Halloween 6 will be a lot of just questions, so forgive me if I keep on asking more questions about
It's okay.
Halloween. Thank you. So I think leading towards the big character change is essentially Michael Myers. And I know, and this is another question I'll be asking later, which is essentially the producer's cut and the direction Michael Myers has in both the theatrical cut and the producer's cut. But in writing Michael Myers, did you have a feeling of, okay, I'm actually writing a character that I've known for the past, like, say, 20 odd years or something to that effect? And what was it essentially the same notions of like writing, Donald Pleasance as Loomis, where it's like, I'm actually writing Michael Myers. I don't want to really mess this up. Or was it just coming in like very second-handed? I mean, second nature, where it's just like it actually just felt, actually flowed, and actually, it's like it's much more easier than it's like writing Michael Myers is much easier than you think it would be.
It's not because we were, we're going in a different territory with this one. We were introducing story elements and threads that what I was attempting to do, I don't know that I was successful. I don't think the final movie was that successful in doing it, was to kind of take all of these threads of story and characters that had been introduced from 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 and trying to bring them all together into one cohesive thing. Cohesive is not what this movie was for a whole bunch of reasons. It was to try to take all of these threads, these story threads and ideas and characters that I felt like, there was 1 and 2 that really established the world of the characters, and then 4, picked it up after 3 was sort of a misstep for fans that wanted more Michael Myers. But yeah, it was really challenging because we're doing a lot of things. We're packing a lot of story into a short film, but a film that was still, a 90-minute movie, a theatrical movie. But we didn't. I wasn't daunted necessarily. I mean, I knew what Michael Myers was going to do. He was going to kill a lot of people and never say anything. So
Yeah.
there's no difficulty with that. I think it was just a matter of kind of placing the story in a way and reintroducing it for an audience, who hadn't had a Halloween movie in would have been 6 years between 5 and 6.
Yeah.
So I think it was bringing it back, and it was also kind of introducing us to a bunch of different characters as we went through it, and then the bigger worshiping this serial killer. So yeah, I think all of those things were really challenging. Not an easy script to write. Went through a lot of drafts, and then it was a lot of as I've talked about this for so many articles and things over the years, but the studio just kind of came in and ran a lot of interference, and I felt like stuck their nose into things they really shouldn't have, like not casting Danielle Harris in the role of Jamie, and it was a whole bunch of things. So it was, my eyes were quickly opened that they weren't going to make the movie I'd written. They were going to make a movie that was convenient, and I'm not referring to the Accods or that group of people. I'm referring to Miramax and the kind of studio suit mentality that got involved in the making.
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask about the studio and stuff like that too, because uh, it's weird because whenever you think of studio interference, Miramax, Dimension Films, almost is like very hand in hand, and
Well, they were the same company. Dimension and Miramax were the same. It was the Weinsteins, and we know how that all turned out, sadly. But no, it was not a filmmaker friendly environment. I felt that I was not really given much of a voice, except for the Accods, who always sort of championed my work, and Malik and his dad Mustafa, God rest his soul. I felt like it was like a us versus them scenario a lot of times, and it just didn't work. And I think it was the beginning of a lot of problems. All the movies that were financed by Dimension and were, fortunately the Accods had signed a contract where if they made greenlit another sequel within a certain period of time, they would continue to hold the
Yeah.
rights. So it was always frustrating because the Akkads, I think after 6 had just wished they would go away. But they saw the money involved and they didn't want to give up on the title. So they continued to greenlight these movies. But it was always a very contentious relationship from what I understand.
Yeah.
And for me, it was not so much contentious. I never really dealt with Weinstein directly, but it was just knowing that a lot of things were being sacrificed, again, pardon the pun, uh, for budgetary reasons, but also just, things that just didn't make any sense. Like why wouldn't you give Danielle Harris the role when she wanted to play it? She was signed on to do it. And then at the last minute, they started messing around with how much money they were going to pay her. It was just ridiculous.
Yeah. And speaking of, well, not speaking of, but in the projection, in tune to producers, where, okay, I kind of joked with a former guest of mine, Yoko, that for the longest years, like we were talking about the Snyder Cut, and I joked that like there was a Snyder Cut in my youth, which was essentially Halloween 6, where
Mhm.
it had a producer's cut, which now will probably be like a extended cut or something to that effect, where it's like it's essentially the same movie, but it's like they add new scenes or they restructure the scenes, or it's not really director's cut, that sort of thing too. Where it's like
Okay.
when you as a screenwriter and there's like studio interference, and then suddenly you have to go, oh, by the way, we need you to go and rewrite the last act of the movie because we screen tested everything, and because I'm not sure if it was screen test that was the problem. I mean, it could be, I'm not sure, or it could be just like
Yeah,
they just
there was a test. They did a test screening. It didn't test well.
oh
I think we all knew that the movie needed some overhauling. But I guess what I didn't anticipate was that they were going to overhaul to that extent and in that direction creatively. Just like they suddenly were turning it into a different movie. And it was just bizarre, like the whole experience of those reshoots. I think, it's been rumored for years that Paul Rudd just hated making the movie and was so like, no, he actually didn't. He was a huge fan and a huge champion of the movie and the script that he signed on to do. And then when they kind of brought him in to do these reshoots, he felt like, wait a minute, what happened to the story that we were telling? Like that was better. And that's what I wanted to make. And so I think like me and a lot of us, who were much younger at the time, we're just feeling the frustration of being forced into this weird kind of, I don't even know what to call it, this alternative universe of what the movie was originally
yeah.
intended to be.
And like I said before, it's like I joked that for longest years that, I mean, I joked to my guests that it was like the Sonic Hub, but looking on it, it was the Sonic Hub of horror, where it's like there was this version of a film that was essentially not looked away because, oh, it was a work print, it's not really the finished film, and then
Mhm.
and then finally the producer's cut was finally released, maybe what was this, several years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I was very, involved in tracking down all the elements for Shout Factory, and I was very involved in getting that finally done. I mean, they really came to me and said we were going to finally do this. I was like, thank God, now I don't have to get emails every day from
Uh,
somebody, some fan around the world, wondering when it's going to ever be legitimately released. They did a great job. I mean, it looks great. It sounded great. It looked like a real movie. So I was happy that they were able to find the pieces of it, to put it all together like that.
Now, I think you kind of like answered your own question, answered this question before, but between the theatrical cut and the producer's cut, which do you prefer?
Well, without question, the producer's cut, however, to me, it still has all of the dings that it had when we first finished it, which was it needs an overhaul, it needs to be rethought, but in a way that still kind of, the word is, that still attends to what the movie was intended to be. So, that's the problem with the producer's cut. It still feels unfinished to me.
Yeah, like it's like from what I've seen, and it does feel like a finished film, but there are stuff around it where it's like there's like more stuff to be talked about,
Yeah.
or
Well, there's
like
just a lot of stuff that either got cut before we ever shot it, or just for time and other reasons. There were weather problems when they made the movie. It was snowing out through most of it. So we couldn't have snow on Halloween. So, a lot of things got kind of changed or ended up not in front of the cameras because of those reasons. So it was, it was a little frustrating, I think, in terms of, just me being the writer, and I didn't have the creative control that you'd want. In retrospect now, knowing what I know, I would have lobbied harder to direct the film and made
yeah.
it my own, because I feel
Uh,
like I would have done a better job.
and I'm pretty sure nowadays you could probably gather as much much support, and this is probably what I'd be asking later, since I know you produce your own work and direct your own work and write your own
Mhm.
work.
Yeah.
You could easily just produce and direct your own like Halloween thing that isn't like something that isn't part of the Halloween series, but still part of the Halloween series by association. I mean, it's not like it's the same movie, but it's more along the lines of it's essentially the same script, or at least the same style of story that I was trying to tell. But yeah, oh, I guess in a way that's because if I talk more about Halloween 6, I feel like this is probably like the be the as long as you were joking before, it's like, oh, we have like enough for two podcasts. One half will be about Halloween 6, the other half will be about your other career. But
Mhm.
but with Halloween 6 and with the way it played out, okay, and this goes with the other Halloweens. Did you know it was like with Halloween H2O, did you, or Halloween 7 at that point, did you know like where the series would be going after Halloween 6, or was it just gonna be like, okay, or did you know it would be very weird just going forward, because with Halloween 7 it'll be like focusing on Tommy and stuff like that too, and then suddenly it became a full on reboot where it's like, oh, now it's just gonna be following after Halloween 2, and then the idea of following after Tommy kind of like ended up essentially going into the comics, because there around that time there was Halloween comics, and essentially it's an actually interesting version of like an alternate version of what if, with Michael Myers and stuff like that too, where it's like I'm trying to remember a lot about it, but one of the twists ends up essentially being that one shape ended up being Laurie herself, but I'm trying to remember how that happens, because so it's like she's
Right.
fake.
Yeah, I was kind of loosely involved with those comic adaptations. Some of it was taken from the treatment that I told you about, that was
Yeah.
6 and 7 combined. An old colleague of mine, Phil Nutman, came to me and said, "Hey, we'd like to do something with Halloween, and you're the expert." So he was working with a company called Chaos Comics, I believe was the name, and so they essentially, they took what I had written as a Halloween 7 treatment and loosely adapted that into a comic, or a couple of them. So yeah, those were kind of cool. But yeah, I after 6 came out and it was disappointing to everyone, there was no, I don't think, any discussion about continuing the story. It didn't surprise me in the least that they rebooted it. And the fact that Jamie Lee Curtis wanted to revisit it was a no-brainer. And that was a smart idea from a business sense. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. It was disappointing, of course, because I would
Yeah.
love to have made that follow-up movie if we had made a proper Halloween 6. But I was glad to have been there when I was there.